Mason Kyle vanished without a trace, but his legacy of terror lives on through a network no one saw coming. In the quiet town of Eastbridge, Colorado, 13 lives were stolen in minutes, but what seemed like a random act of violence turned out to be the latest chapter in a chilling timeline. As investigators uncover yearbooks from the past, underground bunkers, and a manifesto signed by the founders, the horrifying truth emerges. This wasn't a lone shooter, it was a movement.
Ow.
And Mason Kyle was just the beginning. Eastbridge, Colorado was the kind of town people passed through, not one they remembered. It sat quietly between snowy ridges and pine forests, far from the chaos of big cities. Everyone knew everyone. The most exciting thing to happen in months had been the opening of a new coffee shop. But on a bitter Monday morning in February 2021, everything changed in ways no one could have imagined. That day, the silence was broken by sirens, helicopters, and screams that echoed through the cold air. At 8:03 a.m., a 911 call came in reporting gunshots at Eastbridge High School. Within minutes, the school went into lockdown. Police rushed to the scene, unsure of what they would find. Witnesses said it started in the science wing. First one loud bang, then several more, followed by chaos. Students tried to hide under desks, in closets, or wherever they could. Teachers did their best to protect them, but the attack was swift and brutal. When first responders entered the building, they found 13 bodies, 9 students, 3 staff members, and a security guard. Blood stained the polished floors. Books were scattered across hallways. Cell phones buzzed on the ground unanswered. The town was in shock. Parents waited behind police tape, desperate for news. Some cried, others screamed. Many just stood still, unable to comprehend what had happened. News crews from across the country descended on Eastbridge within hours. The phrase mass shooting was repeated over and over on every channel. Everyone expected an answer, a name, a motive. But what made this tragedy even more horrifying was the mystery surrounding it. No one saw the shooter. No one recognized them. There were no gunshots heard before the alarm, no images captured on security cameras. That est because the power had gone out for exactly 6 minutes, the same window in which the shooting occurred. When the lights came back on, the shooter was gone, vanished. No one had entered or left the building on record. Police searched every corner, but there was no trace of the killer. In the science lab, investigators found a black duffel bag filled with empty shell casings and torn gloves. Next to it lay a yearbook, covered in blood. It was old, frayed at the corners, and dusty as if it had been pulled from someone's attic. The year printed on the cover was 1999. The names and faces inside didn't match anyone at the school. The pages were marked with circles, crosses, and symbols. But there was no signature, no note, and no fingerprint. That detail confused authorities more than anything. Why a yearbook from over 2 decades ago? What did it mean? As the town mourned, investigators tried to find a single thread that would explain the attack, but no motive emerged. No suspect was named. The funerals began without answers, and the question that haunted everyone in Eastbridge was the same. Who would do this, and why would they disappear without a trace? As Eastbridge tried to pick up the pieces, the investigation intensified. The town that once felt invincible now carried the weight of fear. Schools across the state increased security. Parents kept their children home. Memorials were built, candles were lit, and the victims' names were whispered with sorrow. But in the background, investigators faced a wall of silence. Leads were few, and most of them faded quickly. There were no witnesses who had seen the shooter, and without surveillance footage, everything felt like guesswork. Authorities initially focused on a 17-year-old former student who had been expelled 3 months earlier for threatening behavior. He had a history of violence and had once posted unsettling messages online. But when police tracked him down, he was at a psychiatric facility in another state during the time of the attack. The timeline ruled him out completely. The media, hungry for answers, shifted attention to staff members, substitute teachers, even delivery drivers who had been on campus the week before. None of it led anywhere. Then, almost 2 weeks after the tragedy, a janitor came forward with something odd he remembered. That morning, he was in the basement storage room, collecting cleaning supplies before the start of classes. He recalled seeing a man walking down the hallway in a maintenance uniform. The strange part, he didn't recognize the man and couldn't recall seeing him before. At the time, he thought maybe it was a contractor brought in by the district. The uniform looked official, and nothing seemed suspicious until the shooting began minutes later. When shown photographs of all maintenance and contract workers, the janitor couldn't identify the person. This led police to a disturbing possibility. Someone had posed as a maintenance worker to gain access to the building. Whoever it was knew the routines, the schedules, and exactly when to strike. They'd blended in, moved with purpose, and disappeared just as easily. Investigators reviewed all deliveries and security logs for the previous 2 months. Still, no clues emerged. The duffel bag left behind was a generic model sold in hundreds of stores. The gloves had no traceable markings. The bullets matched a common assault-style weapon, but no serial number was recovered from shell casings. The most curious item continued to be the yearbook. Forensics team combed through every inch of it. Inside, several photos were crossed out in pen, but none of those people were from Eastbridge or even Colorado. The yearbook was from a high school in Utah, class of 1999. When contacted, that school confirmed that 4 of the people whose pictures were marked had died in a school shooting there in 2002. That case had been closed. The shooter in that incident had been caught and later died in prison. The discovery sent chills through everyone involved. Was it a coincidence? Or was someone revisiting old wounds with deliberate purpose? Suddenly, Eastbridge didn't feel like an isolated tragedy. It felt like a warning. Something deeper was unfolding. Something that stretched beyond state lines. The discovery of the Utah yearbook changed everything. What initially appeared to be an isolated act of violence now hinted at something more calculated. Federal authorities re-examined the details, and a new task force was formed to look for patterns in past school shootings that had remained unsolved or contained unexplained elements. A database was built and slowly chilling similarities began to surface. In multiple cases over the past decade, mass shootings had occurred under unusual circumstances: short power outages, malfunctioning cameras, and suspicious yearbooks or school memorabilia left behind at the scene. Most had been treated as individual tragedies, closed with little follow-up, once suspects were found or presumed dead. But now those details couldn't be ignored. One such case was a 2016 school shooting in the small town of Fairpoint, Ohio. 8 students were killed, and the gunman was never identified. A black duffel bag had been left in a locker, filled with the same caliber ammunition as Eastbridge. A faded school newsletter from 1998 had been tucked inside, featuring photos of students who had no known connection to Fairpoint. At the time, the oddity was written off as a bizarre trophy or token of a mentally unstable shooter. But now, it looked like a signature. Another case in rural Nebraska in 2018 showed nearly identical traits. A fire alarm had been triggered moments before shots were fired, disabling the camera system temporarily. 11 students and 1 teacher were killed. Again, the shooter vanished, and among the debris, police found a school pennant from a different state, this time from a 1997 homecoming football game. These keepsakes, once overlooked as irrelevant, now seemed to form a pattern. Someone was carefully selecting items from the past and planting them in scenes of destruction. But the reason remained elusive. The FBI began to suspect that these shootings were not the work of different individuals, but part of a coordinated effort. A ghost network. The idea was terrifying and unconfirmed, but it explained how these attackers slipped in and out undetected, how they left behind meaningful but confusing items, and how each shooting was staged with precision. These weren't spontaneous outbursts. They were rehearsed. Public fear grew as news of the possible connections spread. Conspiracy theories exploded online. Some claimed the shooters were former military, trained in psychological warfare. Others said it was the work of a cult obsessed with erasing history. Investigators remained quiet, not wanting to ignite panic. But internally, they believed this was the work of a methodical and highly disciplined individual, or worse, a team. The killer or killers were selecting locations that felt safe, untouched, and predictable. And they were operating without a digital footprint. It wasn't just about death. It was about memory. The relics left behind, yearbooks, newsletters, school flags, were all tied to older tragedies. It was as if someone was stitching together a timeline, one that only they understood. And if that was true, it meant Eastbridge was not the beginning. It was just another chapter. And the next one was already being written. With multiple cases now connected by strange memorabilia and vanished suspects, the FBI shifted its focus to geographic mapping. Analysts layered each school location onto digital maps, tracing transportation routes, timelines, and patterns of access. Eventually, they identified a curious overlap. Sheetstown was within a short drive of old military installations or abandoned training sites. That detail led them to explore records of former personnel, especially those discharged for psychological or disciplinary reasons. One name rose to the surface repeatedly: Mason Kyle, a former private security contractor and weapons trainer. He had been dishonorably discharged in 2009 after what was described as increasingly erratic behavior. Reports suggested he had become obsessed with the failures of American security systems and the fragility of public institutions. After his discharge, he vanished. No known job, no legal address. Just rumors of him traveling across the country under false identities, offering consulting services to survivalist groups and fringe communities. Digging deeper, investigators traced the sale of a military-style duffel bag found at Eastbridge to a gun show in Nevada. A booth vendor remembered selling several of those bags to a man who paid in cash and declined to give a name. The transaction seemed routine till he mentioned that the man had unusual requests. He wanted to know how long fingerprints would last on canvas, and whether spent shells could be traced if wiped down. That lead took federal agents to the edge of the Nevada desert, where they discovered something no one expected. Beneath a long-abandoned mining shack, they found an underground bunker, sealed with rusted metal and thick plywood. Inside, the walls were lined with maps of small towns, old class rosters, school architectural blueprints, and VHS tapes. There were shelves stacked with dusty yearbooks dating back to the 1980s, some with names circled or crossed out. Most disturbing of all were the hand-labeled tapes. Drill 1, Ohio. Final Run, Colorado. Test Entry, Nebraska. The tapes showed a mix of footage. Some were rehearsals and abandoned school-like structures. Others appeared to be actual footage from security systems, downloaded or possibly intercepted. The precision of the planning was terrifying. Forensics combed through the bunker, finding traces of burned paper, discarded masks, and one phrase carved into a scorched wood beam: "Perfect isn't real, but practice makes it close." DNA evidence was inconclusive. Most of it had degraded or been destroyed. But one set of partial prints matched Mason Kyle. It was the first physical proof tying him to the attacks. Then came the discovery that changed everything. Buried beneath a false wall was a locked safe. Inside were letters, handwritten in chilling calmness, discussing testing new members, monitoring reaction time, and eliminating variables. One note mentioned Phase 2 targets: Oregon, Wisconsin, Vermont. It was clear that Kyle wasn't acting alone. He was training others, recruiting, organizing, and executing a vision rooted in destruction. Law enforcement raced to warn schools in the named states, but the deeper question remained unanswered. What was the goal? Why these towns? Why the obsession with the past? And most disturbing of all, how many others were already in position waiting for the next signal to strike. As law enforcement scrambled to secure schools in Oregon, Wisconsin, and Vermont, a growing sense of urgency swept through federal agencies. The bunker in Nevada had confirmed their worst fears. Mason Kyle had built something much larger than a one-man operation. Authorities began cross-referencing every unsolved school-related incident in the past 15 years, searching for more clues that might indicate the presence of the founders. The name scrawled across one of the letters found in the safe. The cult-like tone of the messages was undeniable, hinting at a twisted ideology centered around cleansing the timeline, forcing society to confront the illusion of safety. On February 18th, exactly 1 year after the Eastbridge massacre, a tip came in from an anonymous source. It simply read, "Tomorrow. Copper Hill University. 2:15 p.m. Library. Don't ignore this." The message was traced to a burner phone activated for less than 2 minutes in Salem, Oregon. Every detail matched patterns seen in previous incidents: anonymous tip, vague threat, and a specific location with symbolic value. Copper Hill's library was named after a teacher who had stopped a school shooting decades earlier. By sunrise, the campus was surrounded by unmarked federal vehicles. Students were quietly evacuated, and the building was swept from top to bottom. No shooter, no explosives. But inside a locker near the library entrance, authorities discovered a sealed envelope. It contained 6 typed pages of what looked like a manifesto. The language was clinical, detached, but detailed. It described how past attacks had been trial runs, orchestrated to test response times, media coverage, and emotional ripple effects. The author claimed they were resetting societal memory, choosing towns and schools that had already suffered trauma but were beginning to forget. Attached to the manifesto was a list of named students, teachers, and law enforcement officials, along with locations and dates. Some had already been involved in known shootings. Others were unfamiliar. Background checks revealed a chilling detail. Nearly every person on the list had died in a school-related incident going back to 1997. These weren't just targets. They were part of a blueprint. The founders had been tracking school violence for decades, learning from it, feeding off it. Over the following weeks, arrests were made in 6 different states. Individuals tied to Mason Kyle through financial transactions. Storage rentals and coded online forums were taken into custody. Most denied knowing the full extent of the plan, claiming they thought they were part of a doomsday preparation group. One man confessed to scouting schools and sending anonymous warnings, but insisted he never pulled a trigger. The network had operated like a ghost compartmentalized, quiet, methodical. But Mason Kyle himself was never found. His last confirmed location was a security camera image at a gas station near the Utah-Nevada border, taken just days before the Eastbridge shooting. Then he vanished. Whether he died in the desert or continued hiding in plain sight remains unknown. Yet every February, someone leaves a 1999 yearbook at the gates of Eastbridge High. There are no fingerprints, no camera footage, just the silent reminder that the story might not be over.